Good morning. This morning it's my honor to announce our appointment to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Today I'm joined by both the Chief Justice. We're glad to have her here, and she'll be making some comments in a few moments, and Judge Rebecca Bradley. She is officially, as of today, will be my appointment to fill the vacancy of Justice Pat Crooks on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. I want to spend just a moment or two telling you a little bit about her background, and then I'll ask the Chief Justice to share a few words, and then I'll invite Judge Bradley to join us, and then at the end I'll take some questions. Today I just ask, per the importance of this topic, that the questions will be focused on the court and this appointment. I will be making an additional public appearance later today in La Crosse, where I'll take open press and questions on any other subject of that matter. But for today, we're going to focus on questions about the court and about this appointment. Judge Bradley has a distinguished career. She started out, actually got her education at two fine Wisconsin higher education institutions, Bachelor's of Science, graduating with honors from Marquette University on the Dean's List. She also went to the University of Wisconsin Law School, where again graduated with honors and was on the Dean's List, so a distinguished record in higher education here in the state of Wisconsin. During her time at the law school, she worked for the Honorable John Coffey, a member of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 7th District as an extern, and then upon her graduation spent 16 years in private practice at two distinguished law firms here in the state of Wisconsin, as well as part of that time as a vice president for legal affairs at Red Prairie, which is an international software technology company here in the state of Wisconsin. In 2012, she was appointed to serve as a member of the Milwaukee County Circuit Court, and in the spring of 2013, in a contested race, the voters in Milwaukee County saw fit to retain her on the bench as a circuit court judge. Earlier this year, she was appointed to be a member of the Wisconsin Court of Appeals for District 1, and here we are today. And I just wanted to mention, as I said throughout this process, to me I have three criteria for the judicial appointments I make, whether it be on the circuit court, at the county level, whether it be at the Court of Appeals, or now for the first time an appointment we're making to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Three simple litmus tests. I want a man or woman of integrity. I want someone who understands the law. And most importantly, I want someone who understands that the role of the judiciary is to uphold the Constitution of this country and of this state, and those laws duly enacted within it, no more, no less. And I think when you look at this, for me, it was an important process. I personally interviewed each of the applicants yesterday after having gone through our normal process of a panel that looks at the applicants, at a secondary group that does interviews, and then I interview the finalists in each of the cases that we make, be it on the Circuit Court, the Court of Appeals, or now the Supreme Court. I've said for some time that to me this is an important appointment, and that I want to make sure that I put the best person on the bench, regardless of whether they were a candidate or not in the spring of 2016. Obviously, there is precedent for having done this as well, in that Tommy Thompson made two separate appointments to the High Court, one in 1993, where he put then Milwaukee County Circuit Court Judge Janine Geske on the bench. She went on in the spring of 1994 to be elected by the people of the state. Similarly, in 1999, Governor Tommy Thompson appointed then Milwaukee County Circuit Court Judge Diane Sykes, who then went on in the spring of 2000 to be elected by the people of the state. Both were distinguished members of the Wisconsin Supreme Court, well respected even today beyond their service here in the state of Wisconsin. And I believe that Judge Bradley will be that kind of a justice on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. In particular, much like the recent of the two I mentioned, Justice Sykes, who's now on the federal bench, I think was not only highly respected legally, but came in with a strong reputation for her collegial activity with her colleagues on the Milwaukee County Circuit Court, and then came on the Supreme Court and worked well with people from all different perspectives and all different backgrounds. I think you're going to see that Justice Rebecca Bradley will offer that same sort of collegial activity with the members of the Supreme Court, and I'm thrilled for that because I think it's an outstanding appointment. I also know, as the Chief Justice will talk about probably in a moment here, it is important, certainly as I mentioned, after the frankly shocking news of Justice Crook's passing several weeks ago. As I mentioned to you in the press, it was imperative that we give the family the respect of not talking about the process until after the funeral services that we were all at, to honor the really distinguished life, not just in public service, but life overall, of Justice Pat Crooks, and to honor him and his family. We then went through this process as we've done in the past for judicial appointments, and wanted to make sure we put the best person on the bench possible, and that's who we have today. And we think it's important because the court's got business yet before it this year, and it's important to make sure that for the people of this state that each of the slots on the Wisconsin Supreme Court is filled, so that justice can be done here in the state of Wisconsin. And with that, I'd like to ask the Chief Justice of the Wisconsin Supreme Court, Justice Pat Rogensack, to say a few words.
Thank you, Governor. Well, I warmly welcome a new Justice Bradley to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, soon to be Justice Rebecca Bradley. You know, her service as a Court of Appeals judge and as a circuit court judge will really help in giving her a smooth transition to our court, because she understands both the trial process and the appellate process. And of course, we are an appellate court. So I really am looking forward to welcoming her as a new colleague on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and I know the other justices will welcome her as well. I also thank you, Governor Thompson, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to put aside other things you were doing, because, you know, the Wisconsin Constitution sets out 7 justices to serve on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and we really function better when we have a full complement of justices. Each of us brings a different perspective to the issues that are placed before the court, so it's very important that we have the benefit that the Constitution provides by having 7 people discuss the issues that the public brings to us. We can serve the public much better as a court of 7 than we can with a lesser number. So thank you so much for taking the time. And welcome, soon to be, Justice Bradley.
Well, and thank you, Chief Justice. We appreciate your leadership, not only your comments here today, but your leadership on the court. And with that, Judge Bradley, we welcome you to say a few words. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I would first like to express my sincere sympathy to the family of Justice Pat Crooks. Everyone in his judicial family was deeply saddened and shocked to learn that he had passed away, and I honor his memory and his decades of service to the people of Wisconsin as a member of the judiciary. I am deeply honored and humbled that the governor has expressed his confidence in me in appointing me to fulfill Justice Crooks's term, and I thank him for giving me the opportunity to serve the people of Wisconsin. It has been my privilege to serve as a circuit court judge and a judge on the Wisconsin Court of Appeals. I am committed to the rule of law, to applying the law fairly and impartially, and to upholding the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of Wisconsin. I am very much looking forward to serving as a member of the state Supreme Court, and I am looking forward to working with each of my colleagues on the Supreme Court to ensure that the people of Wisconsin and the interests of justice are well served. Thank you. Thank you.
With that, as I mentioned, we'll take questions on the appointment, on the process, on the court, and as I mentioned, I'll be in La Crosse later, so if you or affiliates have questions on other topics, I'll certainly be welcome those at that time.
You cited a couple of examples where appointments have been made in the past and people will not be elected. But in both those examples, those candidates were not announced candidates yet for the court, like Judge Bradley was when he made this appointment. What do you say to those who argue that this is giving her an advantage in the election in the spring that the other candidates don't have?
I think the difference in both those cases is only a matter of days. I mean, it was pretty clear that both of them were going to run for those openings. I think it's literally just semantics. The bottom line is Governor Tommy Thompson made appointments to put the best person in on the bench at the time when he made the appointment, regardless of when the next election was. Just as Governor Doyle had his discretion. In his case, he didn't have any examples where they were up right away the following year, but he made appointments that then had to face the voters a couple years later after that. And I think it's incumbent upon any governor, Democrat or Republican, to put the best person on the bench. And my view is I shouldn't disqualify someone just because they're announced candidates. But it was clear that both of those were people who were appointed and were prepared to run should they receive that appointment.
Governor, this is the third time you've appointed Justice Bradley to a judicial post. Can you explain why you've repeatedly tapped her for these spots?
Well, I think she's had a distinguished career in the private sector, 2 significant law firms, time at one of the a premier company, an international software company, Red Prairie, here in the state of Wisconsin as well. Had a distinguished record. She's got excellent qualifications overall. And as I mentioned, I think probably one of the most important things was, as you know, in Milwaukee County, having a Republican governor make an appointment, particularly over the last few years, doesn't necessarily guarantee that someone's going to be elected at their next term. She had a contested election. The voters in Milwaukee County saw fit and said this person, regardless who appointed her, Republican or Democrat, this is the person that was appropriately in a position to be on the court. And the voters of that county affirmed her, regardless of who the appointing authority was. And I think now you see on the Court of Appeals, you've seen through her time in the Circuit Court, now in the Court of Appeals, she's worked well with her colleagues there. I would anticipate she'll work well with her colleagues on the Wisconsin State Supreme Court. And so there's just a lot of good characteristics there. And as I mentioned, my criteria overall is simple. I want someone who's a person of integrity. Certainly, I think if you talk to people who work with her not only on the bench, but work with her in private practice and in pro bono and other work, would say that Rebecca Bradley is a person of integrity. I want someone who understands the law. If you look at her distinguished record, graduating with honors at both Marquette and at the law school, and all the other work that she's done within the body of law over the last several years, I'd say this is somebody that people across the spectrum would say understands the law. And third, most importantly, she's shown both in private practice, but particularly now on the bench, that she understands the role of the judiciary is to uphold the Constitution, both the state and the federal Constitution, and those laws duly enacted within it. And I think she's going to be an excellent addition to the Supreme Court.
Governor, thank you all. Thank all 3 of you for answering our questions. Are you saying that there's no difference between appointing someone in private life and appointing a candidate to that office that the candidate is seeking? And could Justice Bradley and you, Governor, both address if you really feel there's no difference?
Well, again, I think when you had Diane Sykes and Janine Geske, again, were both examples of people who were on the bench. They were both circuit court judges at the time. The difference here is she's not just a circuit court judge, she's now in the Court of Appeals, so she's got one more layer of experience, something I think it's very valuable, as the Chief Justice would know, as a former Court of Appeals judge. In fact, probably in some ways more applicable than even being on the circuit court, because while that gives you trial court experience in the circuit court, being an appeals court judge is the appeals process by which the Supreme Court is fundamentally based as well. And so that gives someone, I think, a leg up in terms of experience and understanding of that process. But to me, if you look at this, this is a similar pattern to what Governor Thompson's done in the past. The difference with Governor Doyle, of course, is just the appointment he made was several years before that individual was up for appointment. But I think any governor, regardless of party, be it Governor Doyle, Governor Thompson, looking at this past, would say, well, if you're picking someone who's the best person to be on the slot on the Supreme Court, why wouldn't you want that to be the best person, and why wouldn't you want that to be somebody who's committed to running for that position? And that's, to me, it just makes sense. If you're going to put someone on, you want that person to be the best person, and you want that person to ultimately earn the trust of the voters of the state of Wisconsin, just like Judge Bradley was appointed to the Milwaukee County Circuit Court, and in turn earned the trust of the voters in Milwaukee County, even in a contested election.
The Wisconsin Supreme Court has had a lot of personal differences that were spilled out in public in recent years. What's going to be your approach to getting to know the other 6 members? And do you feel that you have any role to try to calm the waters in some way on that court?
I'm really looking forward, as I said, to working with each of my fellow colleagues on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. I've enjoyed my judicial tenure and have been able to get along very well and very collegially with my colleagues on the Circuit Court bench and on the Court of Appeals, and I expect to have the same positive working relationships with each of my new colleagues.
Judge Bradley.
Could you please address that earlier question about whether you have any pause taking the appointment while you seek the office?
Certainly. I believe the voters will have the opportunity over the course of the next 6 months or so to evaluate the credentials and the qualifications of each of the candidates for this office, and it is ultimately the voters' decision who they want to serve for a full 10-year term after the completion of this term.
Judge Bradley or Justice Rogansack, have either of you looked at the docket in front of the Supreme Court? And are there any cases that you sat on either the Circuit Court or the Appeals Court that you'll need to recuse yourself of on the Supreme Court?
I will be meeting with Justice Rogansack and also speaking with the Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals, Judge Neubauer, to work on a seamless transition. I don't know the answer to that question yet.
Governor, are you endorsing Justice Bradley in the spring election, or is this not an endorsement?
Well, I think she's the best person to be on the Supreme Court today, and I believe next April she'll be the best person to be on the Supreme Court. So I'm not making a political endorsement at this time, but I wouldn't put somebody on the bench that I didn't think belonged there. So I think that's pretty clear what my opinion is, and I hope the voters of the state of Wisconsin do. Again, this is a process I've done before in Milwaukee County, and per the question about collegiality, as you all know, I used to work within the Milwaukee County Courthouse, and that's a place where people's opinions, good and bad and in between, are not very well kept secrets. And so with all the different members of the Circuit Court, we do due diligence on any of our appointments, be it to this position, the Court of Appeals, the Circuit Court, as well as district attorneys, sheriffs, and other positions out there. We reach out and get incredible feedback from people across the state, particularly within those jurisdictions. And I got to tell you that Milwaukee County has a very diverse Circuit Court bench in terms of personalities and ideological and political backgrounds. And we've heard nothing but strong praise for Rebecca Bradley in terms of her time in the Circuit Court. I think you would find similar comments in terms of her collegiality with her colleagues on the Court of Appeals, and I would anticipate the same would be true on the Wisconsin Supreme Court.
Do you feel like being appointed 3 times by Governor Walker gives you an advantage in the spring election, or will hurt your chances?
Again, I think the voters of Wisconsin will have the opportunity to evaluate my qualifications, my experience on and off the bench as a member of the legal and judicial professions for over 19 years and make a decision based on those factors and my work ethic.
Thanks, guys. Just one, and you have been appointed 3 times by the governor. Do you think that helps you in your election or hurts you? You didn't answer that question.
I'll say one last thing to wrap up.
I think when the voters are evaluating judicial candidates, they look less at who's appointed them and they look at their record on the bench, how they conduct their campaigns, and what their qualifications and experiences are. I don't think they look at who has appointed that judge or justice.
And I would just echo that to close, that to me, if people look, and I love it in the spring every year, as you all know, being around the Capitol, this place is filled with 4th grade classes. And they often study the state government, and they look at the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. Under the Constitution, it is my responsibility as governor to make an appointment when there's a vacancy in the Wisconsin Supreme Court, just like if there's a vacancy in any other judicial position in this state. It's my responsibility to the voters to put the best person on the bench possible. Once that appointment is made, the voters will have a chance to see soon-to-be Justice Bradley as she interacts with her colleagues and listens to the cases and acts as a full member of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And next spring, they'll have a decision to make whether they want to retain Justice Bradley or whether they want to make another decision out there. What the voters of the state should look at is not the appointing authority, one way or another. Whether you like me or dislike me or you're somewhere in between, even for those people who are ardent supporters of mine, they shouldn't be looking at the appointment. What they should be looking at is this the best person qualified to be on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. I believe in our looking at the applicants that we had and our choices here in the state of Wisconsin that absolutely 100% Judge Rebecca Bradley is the best person to be on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. That she fits that criteria I mentioned of a person of integrity, a person who has a full and good understanding of the law, and most importantly, someone who will uphold the Constitution, both the Constitution of the state and of the United States of America, and will apply the law evenly to all people within the state under that. That's what I think people expect out of Supreme Court justice. They don't want a Republican, they don't want a Democrat, they don't want a partisan, they want someone who can ultimately fulfill those requirements. And I believe that Judge Rebecca Bradley is the best person for that position, which is why I made that appointment today. Thanks.
Something about Getzke, though, she told me 3 weeks ago she wasn't gonna run. When she appointed her, are you sure she was gonna run for that seat when Tommy appointed her back in '93?
Well, I'm not talking about whether, I'm saying that they each made the decision to run once they were appointed. To me, whether they're candidates or not, in her case, there was an announcement made of the vacancy of a retirement that summer. I believe it was July. In fact, I remember the Milwaukee Journal sitting around an editorial saying that normally they would leave it up to the discretion, actually it was the old Journal at that time, it wasn't the Journal Sentinel, saying they would leave it up to the discretion of the governor, but in this instance, they were still lobbying to put Janine Geske on the bench, even though there were 2 other well-qualified applicants. One was Judge D'Amato, one was Judge Crooks at that time, actually. Pat Crooks was one of the finalists for that position in 1993, and ultimately they advocated for Janine Geske to be on the bench. Whether they were candidates or not at the time is irrelevant. They were obviously going to run. Geske and Sykes both were going to run if they were. No, if they were going to run if they were appointed. I think it was clear by all accounts. I was in the legislature at the time. There were people circling around both of those individuals to get them to be well positioned to run, to be retained on the Supreme Court. That was a retirement that was said. It wasn't. It was earlier in the year. In this case, the announcement of Justice Crook's retirement was just made a few weeks ago, not in July as it was in that instance. But it was clear that both Janine Geske and Diane Sykes, once they were appointed, were fully prepared to run to be retained as members of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And, the Journal at that time and other publications could have said, no, you need to make a recess, or not a recess, but you need to make a short-term appointment to fulfill the term of the person retiring. They didn't. They advocated for someone specifically to be on the bench. That's what Governor Thompson did at that time, just like Governor Doyle made appointments of Justice Butler to fill the position that was open. Again, that one's a little different because it was a longer period of time. But as the Chief Justice mentioned, even the next several months, there's business before the court. And I think it's incumbent upon me as governor to make sure that we don't have a long-term vacancy, and that if this is someone that the voters are ultimately going to retain, that person have a chance to get up and go, be a part of the court going forward, and then if the voters see fit to retain her, that she'll be well positioned to continue to work with the court. No, there's still, as Judge Bradley mentioned, she's going to be meeting after this with the Chief Justice, as well as talking with the Chief Judge in the Court of Appeals just to work on the timing.
That's all we have time
Great,
for.
thanks, Judge.